recognize that there needs to be a two-state solution, but ironically has never recognized Palestine as a state. This symbolic, this achievement happened only last year after sustained grassroots mobilization, after concerted efforts by all of the separate Caribbean states, and last year in April 2024, after Jamaica recognized Palestine as a state, so did Barbados. This has now led us to develop, as I've said, more structured campaigns, but also because we are smaller, we are able to become closer to state actors and enforce universal jurisdiction as domestic law. So we have recently now launched a landmark trial against the Supreme Court, in the Supreme Court in Barbados as a genocide case, where we are holding the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, the Director of Public Prosecutions, and the Immigration Department accountable to enforce, because they have adopted the Genocide Convention and the Geneva Convention. We are holding the governments to say, now you need to enforce this as domestic law. So we have taken 6 actions, and the case was heard a couple of weeks ago, and now we are asking the Barbados to essentially investigate or prosecute anyone on Barbadian soil who has been involved in the genocide. There are a number of IDF soldiers that are on island at the moment. We have received several witness statements and are now currently gathering a lot of evidence to take this trial to court. Since then, because we are a regional alliance, a number of other Caribbean states have started to follow suit. So my point around critical success factors is believing in an alliance and to really information share, to have concerted actions, to believe in the power of protest, because symbolic wins ignite the fire and they light the fire for sustained and deep transformation.
This is a challenge because everyone's been commendably brief, and I've got to match that standard. So, look, the question here, where have we got evidence that protest leads to tangible shifts in policy and in institutional accountability? I want to start briefly by just looking at, and from my organisation's perspective, Palestine Solidarity Campaign, what's our fundamental theory of change? What do we see as our role? And we believe that the role of a solidarity movement, of solidarity organisations, is to support the resistance of an oppressed people to their oppression, to support their struggle for liberation, by creating external pressure on their oppressor. And the way that we do that, our task is in our own domains to end every aspect of complicity with that oppression. That means ending the complicity of our government, and that means full arms embargo, full body of sanctions. It means ending the complicity of public bodies, and that means specifically local authorities, universities, national health trusts that are complicit through the companies that they invest in and that they procure from, and it means ending the complicity of those companies and corporations themselves. And what's the second dimension of our theory of change? It's the one that we've heard from everyone. It is the belief that even in deeply flawed democratic structures, the popular pressure can create levers of change. Now, we're looking for tangible evidence, and if we start with the first of those dimensions, where is the evidence? Even right now, in the context of nearly 2 years of a genocide, and now the forced starvation of the people that is seeing people dropping dead on the streets of Gaza through organ failure, where is the evidence that this extraordinary body of pressure that we have built in this country has led to tangible shifts in government policy? They are very thin on the ground. Every single one of you knows the inadequacy of the response, but I refer back to what Frank said this morning. We know governments are the last to act. And we are now seeing actually the impact of this extraordinary body of pressure. Anybody who's been watching David Lammy in the last week, I don't think I've ever in my life seen a politician so physically uncomfortable with the position that he is publicly having to maintain. He had a question thrown at him in Parliament last week by a Tory MP, don't you consider the possibility right now that you're going to end up in The Hague? His body language said that's exactly what is on my mind at the moment, but it hasn't led to any change in policy. So if I'm looking at tangible evidence and if I narrow this, let's look at the last 2 years of the horror we've been confronting, and where have we seen tangible shifts? Well, I'm going to focus on institutional accountability. One of the campaigns we launched about 3 years ago was a campaign targeting local government pension schemes. We did research that demonstrated collectively they invest £4 billion in companies complicit in the oppression of the Palestinian people. We launched that campaign. We knew this was long and hard work. We had to put it on hold because the government then decided to introduce an anti-boycott law that would make it illegal for councils to do what we were asking them to do. They would not be allowed to make a divestment decision if the issue of concern was Israel's violation of the rights of the Palestinian people. We got together a coalition of 80 organisations. We succeeded in delaying the passage of that legislation. It fell when the last government fell. That was about a year ago, July last year. Since then, 16 councils have now made commitments to divest. Why do I think that has happened? Because they are all looking at upcoming local council elections. As Shamil said, they're all looking at what happened in the last general election. How did we build those victories? What were the key ingredients? Well, we did the research. We provided them with the evidence of where are you complicit. We presented them then with an argument based on what are your legal and moral responsibilities. You have responsibilities to not violate international law through the investments that you make. And then we are going to give you, we're asking to pass motions that accept that general responsibility, and we're providing you with the evidence of where you're actually violating that commitment. And then we build grassroots pressure. We have a network of over 100 branches. And so those councils were subject to petitions, to protests, to disruptions, to sit in at all of their meetings until we secured those victories. The second example I would use, we launched a campaign, Don't Buy Apartheid. There was a call in line with the call across the global BDS movement for every shop, every supermarket in the UK to stop selling Israeli goods. Within 2 months of the launch of that campaign, the British supermarket, the Co-op, had a motion passed at its AGM and then committed to implement that motion that it will withdraw all Israeli goods from its shelves. Again, what won that? That won through presenting the evidence, presenting the arguments, and then again grassroots pressure. Pressure on the members of the Co-op, a lobbying campaign of the members of the Co-op, to say you should not be supporting the sale of goods that right now are supporting a state that's implementing a genocide. So that's where I give sort of evidence of the power of grassroots pressure to implement change.
Thank you so much, man. Now for the next question. When me and Yasmin were on the Madeleine, after we left the boat, after the illegal interception, the kidnapping, and we got back to our homes, people said, what a huge victory that was, and the press and the media was always pushing us to say that we had a victory, that this was not only a symbolic win, but a concrete win for us, and we would refrain from that. We would always say, look, do we have a humanitarian corridor to Gaza? No, we don't. There are still starving children in Gaza? Yes. So how can we call this a victory? And the idea of the next question will be to discuss precisely that. After the Madeleine, Israel attacked Iran, after the global march to Gaza, Sumud convoy, and all this amazing mobilization that filled the streets again, inspired a lot of people to mobilize again. We had a lot of other defeats in the Zionist project, advancing and increasing violations in many ways. So the idea would be to discuss with you right now, starting from Ben, how do we distinguish the symbolic wins from structural change in our advocacy and mobilization strategy? How do we go from the symbolic wins to structural change?
Yeah, and look, this is one of the key questions and one of the most difficult questions. And I know that Mustafa, and what he said earlier, and in a question he put, rightly wants to put everyone on the spot about this, which is how do you know you're having impact? And in the type of work we all do, that is incredibly difficult to measure. My frame of response always, and this is to me what it means when we're also considering the question, is what we're doing strategic? And that means, Noam Chomsky once gave an answer to this question, what does it mean to be strategic? And he said, well, consider this. What I'm about to do, is it going to increase my power and the power of the movement and reduce the power of my opponents or not? And that's something you should always have in your mind when you're looking to do anything. And if I go back to what I said about the theory of change, that if what we are doing is seeking to end the complicity of every aspect of our society, government, public bodies, companies and corporations, is what we are about to do. And if we win a victory, does that victory increase the possibility of achieving that outcome? Or does it make no difference, or does it even reduce that possibility? And so you have difficult sort of challenges and trying to judge, is this taking us forward? Is it not taking us forward? If I was trying to look at examples of where those dilemmas are acute, I'd look at the work we at PSC have tried to do within the trade union movement, where you are constantly faced with the battle on, are we getting what we want at the moment? Is this actually taking us to the point where we're ending all of the complicity of our trade union movement at the moment? You know, we have trade union members of this country that are handling goods that have been shipped to Israel. We have trade union members that are working in complicit companies. How do we end that complicity? And so you sometimes come across the question, and we face this when you begin sometimes with trade unions and trying to get motions passed, policies passed. Now, when you've got a policy passed, is that a victory? If you've won a successful campaign to get them to pass a motion, or is it just symbolic? And to me, you keep coming back. Is this taking them in the right direction? Is it a step towards what we want them to do next? For many, many years at PSC, the battle we fought within the trade union movement was trying to get them to adopt the right frame of understanding, the right description and understanding of what is the nature of the oppression of the Palestinian people. For a long time, we tried to get them to understand we're dealing with a structure of apartheid here. We're not dealing simply with a military occupation, and that's the extent of the problem. We are dealing with an overarching structure of apartheid that affects every dimension of Palestinian society, including those in exile denied the right return. That is part of the structure of apartheid, and that is your frame of understanding that you need to adopt. And it took many, many years. We began by getting a motion passed that said, are we maybe on the road to apartheid? And we have many people saying, that's a defeat, because we're at apartheid. We've been at apartheid for a long time. But our thinking was, we're taking them down a journey. So the question always was, is it taking us forward? We've got a very current example within Unite the Union. It's no secret to anybody that the policy of Unite the Union under its current leadership went backwards, significantly backwards. It was a major obstacle to what we're trying to do with the trade union movement. There were many people saying what we have to do about that, and particularly my organisation, where Unite is an affiliate, is abandon our relationship with Unite the Union, because they are now an anchor and a drag on what we're trying to achieve. Our strategy was to work internally within Unite the Union, to mobilise the grassroots of the union, to put internal pressure. At their last conference, they had 17 motions on Palestine, more than any other issue. And where that took the leadership was to pass a statement that I think is a seismic step forward on the journey we want them to be. It says they will support any member who refuses to be complicit, for example, by handling goods that have been shipped to Israel, including weapons. That's a seismic move for Unite the Union. But whether or not this is a symbolic victory or a real victory now depends on, do they implement that? So our task now, we think we've got an opening, is to apply pressure at every level of Unite to say, you've passed this, you have to implement it. And that's the task. So these are, that's a sort of very general answer, but I think the question for me always comes back with, do you have a clear understanding of where you're trying to go? And is there a way of measuring and being clear about, is this a step towards that, or are we actually taking a step backwards? Thank you, Ben.
that we don't have.
Thank you, John. I think you've got most of what I was going to say, but I think we can all agree that symbolic wins aren't devoid of merit, right? So I like to think of symbolic wins as doors. They don't change the room, but they open a path to get in and do the deeper work. So essentially, they lay the groundwork for deeper transformation, and that's what we've seen in our experience at CAP. Just to think about kind of symbolic wins, so they often provide visibility, they provide momentum, they help to shape and shift narratives, and they really help to energize and galvanize movements, which we have seen so far. We've seen so many different Palestine Alliance movements set up, but we've now seen alliances develop through protests, through the amazing student encampments that have been led by the youth, by the Palestinian youth movements, by the younger generation. And so I think, as well as the campus encampments, some of the statements of solidarity, I come from an artistic background, I think the artist boycotts that we've seen at music festivals, the idea of artists, music festivals also divesting from companies that have been complicit in Israeli settlements has been a huge win for us that has started off in protest. Are all kind of examples of how we've seen these symbolic wins lead to actual direct action and divestment and sanctions. So I think when we think of some of these examples, obviously temporary ceasefires and pauses in violence don't address the root causes, but I think that the protests and the viral campaigns that we've seen on social media do. They could be seen as symbolic wins, but they have really, really helped to raise awareness. And I'd like to say a specific example of some of the Palestinian social media, influencers, or you may even call them journalists now, these young Gazan journalists like Wissam, who have really, now with an Instagram following of 5 million followers, have really raised awareness about what is going on, what are the on-the-ground realities that are happening in the face of a number of journalists being targeted. So I think in terms of what are the key distinctions between symbolic wins and structural change, I feel that we have to ask ourselves 4 questions. The durability of the change. Is the change permanent or is it reversible when we're thinking through our actions? The power shift. Does it transfer power? Do our actions transfer power and resources to the oppressed? And then the systemic impact. Does it do our actions alter the root causes, or do they just alter the symptoms? And a very important example here is BDS and direct action. Palestine Action is a very good example here of over a sustained 1-year campaign at Barclays Bank was able to get them to divest completely from Elbit systems. So I think that's the third, and finally the accountability mechanisms. Do we have practical tools to enforce and sustain these changes? So I think, in terms of the takeaways on advocacy strategies, I think we should treat symbolic wins as mobilizing tools, not end goals. They're enablers. We use them to build momentum towards deeper measurable transformation. We use symbolic moments and we translate them into structural campaigns. And we have the right structures in our alliances to ensure that we have concrete goals. So if we're having student encampments or student protests, let's ensure that they then lead to very specific, tangible actions like divestment, like policy reform, like procurement changes, and also legal challenges. And then finally, I think someone in the crowd mentioned metrics. How are we actually tracking our changes? And something that we are doing at the Caribbean Against Apartheid in Palestine movement is that we are looking at financial flows. We're looking at contract changes. We're looking at votes passed. We're looking at the data that our actions then create. And how do we analyze that? And how do we get the right evidence? So I'll stop there and let others speak.
Right. I'll go back to my earlier example of how we managed to get the change in legislation for freer and fairer elections in Malaysia. Now, the symbolic win was Of course, we managed to get protests, the number of protesters going to the streets in huge numbers. But there was also another fundamental strategy as well, where we made alliances with various segments of it. Just now I said about the youth, but we also made alliances with the Chinese. My country is 65% Muslims, 35% are non-Muslims, and they comprise, the non-Muslims comprise of a significant number of Chinese people. So we managed to get the Chinese to be together with the campaign. So on the Palestine campaign as well, now we are, one of our strategic focus is also to try to get the Chinese non-Muslims to be on board. Now it's a difficult task as well, because the Chinese always think that Palestine issue is a religious issue. It's the Muslims issue. You know, they are fighting among themselves. You see, so why should I bother myself with the Palestine issue? So these are among the challenges that we face. And but now we notice a significant shift in their perception towards the Palestine issue as well. Because I've had quite recently a meeting with one of the influential Chinese figures in Malaysia. He told me that now it's very clear it's a genocide. It's no longer self-defense. How can you justify killing people who are queuing for food in Gaza? You cannot justify it anymore. So to them also it's genocide. So I managed to get one of my articles to be published in one of the main Chinese newspapers in Malaysia just recently. First time I got it. Because of the shift in perception among the Chinese. And then about a month ago, we had a meeting with the Chinese Association of Independent Schools, because in Malaysia, the Chinese are allowed to operate their own schools, Chinese schools, based on their own curriculum. Of course, they follow the national curriculum, but they add in also some subjects relating to the Chinese culture and so on. So I had a meeting with the chairman of the Chinese Schools Association to improve the students' grasp of the Malay language, because we use that for unity purposes in Malaysia. We use the Malay language. So we come to them as a friend, we say, we want to improve the command of Malay language among the Chinese students. And then we talk about the Palestine issue. And then the chairman of the Chinese Schools Association, he told me that, okay, but Lisha will form a joint task force with you on improving the Malay language, but also we will also address the issue of Palestine to the Chinese students. Now, to me, this is a fundamental shift, because we are now building, this is towards educating the next generation of Chinese in Malaysia. It's a huge, I mean, I really, I couldn't hide my joy at that during that meeting, because to me, to try to educate the next generation is also another strategy that we need to do, not just this particular generation, but looking at the next generation as well. So we agreed to that, and we've already formed the joint task force just recently. So now we are trying to get into. So because when you target the next generation, it will become easier for you to address the Palestine issue. So these are something that I'd like to share with you all, that some of the strategies that we need to do as well.
Yeah, the question jars with me a little bit, because what are the objectives of everybody in this room? The objectives are freedom and justice for the Palestinian people. That's our ultimate goal. So everything that's been outlined is a door, if you want to call that a symbolic victory. But everything that advances that cause is good. And We talked earlier about protests, 29 protests since October 2023, huge protests, the smallest, 80,000, which is huge in its own right in the city. But that gave people an outlet to be involved, to express their anger. It gave people an opportunity to be activists. And the next generation, a speaker earlier talked about, giving young people their place, giving them leadership. That brings through the next generation. So there's the objectives, there's the strategy. We must have a strategy. Our strategy today is to build a global alliance. I was listening earlier to our speakers, Medea there in the United States, and Yasmin in Germany. And Yasmin, the pressure, the huge pressure that you're facing. So what supports do we get? Legal supports, solidarity supports, digital media. In the United States, I mean, I found what you said uplifting earlier, because a lot of people would think that Donald Trump is the United States, that the people who are funded by the Israeli lobby are the United States. But as you said, you can see the change in New York, and there's another United States, of activists, of students, and campuses, of pushback. So I suppose it's giving support to each other, particularly those. Like I'm in Ireland, and in Ireland we were a colonised country. We suffered oppression. We suffered a great hunger. We lost a huge. So instinctively we are, anti-imperialist, anti-colonial. So it's easier for me in Ireland to operate as a supporter of the Palestinian people. But we have our strategy. We have our tactics. It's broad-based. I mean, I'm the Sinn Féin TD, Member of Parliament, but Sinn Féin alone will not get victory for the Palestinian people in Ireland. It has to be a broad-based movement. You must step back. You must have humility. You must let the grassroots rise organically to the top. So I suppose the question jars with me, frankly, because I don't want to dismiss gains as just symbolic. They don't mean anything. Anything means something. The waving of a Palestinian flag in one village or town surely gives hope to somebody in Gaza who's looking at bombs coming at them. Somebody cares about me, the defiance of kneecap, I'm so proud of the Rouge lads from our country, So everything is beneficial as long as you're focused on the objective. What is the objective of your action on the other side? Everything is useful.
Thank you. Obviously people have said a lot that I might have said, but I feel maybe this is the time I should just talk a little bit about, the Jewish hat and the fact that it's in the concept paper about addressing the weaponization of anti-Semitism. So the organisations I'm connected to are absolutely clear it is nothing to do, it's not about us. And one of the things is that the Israeli government and the Israeli apologists want to make it about us, and it isn't about us. I don't go around and rest my life saying I'm a Jewish woman against the cuts, I'm a Jewish woman for free healthcare, etc. But unfortunately on this issue it's necessary. I'm not the only person in this room connected with Global Jews for Palestine. Chaim is a good end, I want to give him a wave. His organisation, Jewish Network for Palestine, is also a member. I found really helpful what Pedro said. I mean, what I was doing is I've been trying to write an article myself for our own website about the wins, because we hear it's very easy to share the information rightly about how terrible things are, and that can just leave us very, very depressed. It doesn't mean we need to overstate the wins and pretend that we've broken through, but yeah, every step counts, and every small victory helps to inspire people to that possibility I mentioned earlier, that this will end, and it will not just end, but it will end with a move towards a liberation for the Palestinians. So we must, and this may be a later question, but one of the things by being connected, more connected internationally, it is not just sharing the wins in our country. We have just in my hometown, the very first town in this country has actually decided to, at last, I don't quite know the wording, but basically support the twinning with Al-Mawasi. The local Palestine Solidarity Campaign branch has been linked with Al-Mawasi, which no one had heard of. It was just like we're a fishing town, they're a fishing village. And it is the first place that's actually linked with somewhere in Gaza. That took an enormous amount of work, which I take no credit, that's the local branch. But finally, with some very emotional speeches just over a week ago, that motion got passed. We need people to know that, not because it's my hometown, but because there is a difference. And I can tell you on the messages on WhatsApp from the people in Al-Mawasi who we're connected to, they are so, even though they are desperate and exhausted physically and mentally, they are so uplifted by that. So we must make the most of the wins that we have, because for those people who haven't been in this game for so long, and it seems an impossibility, we have to big up the wins rationally and so on, but we mustn't forget those. I was going to say a bit more about the Jewish thing. The presence of Jewish people on the demonstrations, the actions that Jewish Voice of Peace, in the United States, blocking Grand Central Station, surrounding the Statue of Liberty, blocking, I think it was Brooklyn Bridge, being arrested in their huge numbers. These smaller actions, I mean, there is a group in Ireland, Latvia, tiny groups of people, who have felt the absolute need to stand up and make it very clear, not just that it's not in our name, but that we absolutely stand with the Palestinians. And the more that we can give voice to the Palestinians, the more I'm very happy to step back. But while it still counts, I will be shouting loud and clear as a Jewish person, but I will never stop. I will never stop being silent. I'll never be silent about the trumpet. I could talk a lot, unfortunately, about that horrible way.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so obviously I agree with everything about symbolism. It's important. It's everything's a stepping stone in the right direction. Agree. Unless that symbolism is actually playing you, unless that symbolism is actually stopping the movement. I'll give a clear example here. So if you look back, let's just say 15 years ago, there was no real voice in the Labour Party in terms of Palestine. Then you have something called LFPME, Labour Friends of Palestine Middle East, come about, right? Seems like a win. It's a win, symbolic win. It's there. There is no voice on Palestine. It's there. It's good. Now, it sounds good. It's a good win. But then if you look at how LFPME, which looks like a symbolic win in terms of policy, how much they've spoken out, or lack of, how much impact that is making, how much that's actually restricting people from getting more involved. That, for me, it looks like a symbolic win, and it feels like, oh, they've got something, but that tick box is working against us, because it feels as though it's doing more than it is. So sometimes you've got to look at the symbolism and see, you know what, is that symbolism just playing us? Is it there as a tool to keep us silent? Because again, if you look at LFPME and the members in the LFPME, how many members are also in Labour Friends of Israel? Look at it. So it doesn't take, if I can work out, man, and I'm sure everyone else can work out, let's just put it that way, right? Yes, that's me done on symbolism. But I'm also keen, we need to kind of get this bit, us guys, done quickly, because there's so much from here that I think we need to kind of get to in all honesty. So we'll go to the next question.
Thank you very much. So now for time management issues, we are going to direct questions to 3 of you each question. And then we'll go to the last question that we need all of you to answer. So the next question will be to Ben, to Leah, and to Badlisha. And the question is, in confronting state repression, what kinds of legal political infrastructure are needed across borders to protect organizers and campaigns? Now I'm going to kindly ask you to answer in 2 minutes. Thank you so much. The only person who can mute me here is Shamil, because we're sharing the mic, so I don't have a mic to stop him.
Oh,
you can go, Kimberly.
Yeah, not my area of expertise, so I'm not going to waste too much of your time. We obviously do have to have friendly lawyers. I don't know what the answer to this question is. It's really complicated, and particularly across borders. Unfortunately, I feel very flummoxed because of the failure of international law. So I'm not going to waste any more of your time. I'm sure these experts over here will.
Thank you, Leah. Patricia.
I think one of the things that we can, and one of the speakers in the earlier panel discussion also mentioned about this. I think one of the things that we can also embark upon to protect, or rather to so that we can sustain the campaign is to have regional coalitions. For example, now in our region, ASEAN region, Association of Southeast Asian Nations, there is an ASEAN Parliamentary Caucus on Palestine. Now, just to share with you, there is already a Malaysian Parliament Caucus on Palestine, and then there's also another Indonesian Parliament Caucus on Palestine. So they've come together and formed the ASEAN Parliamentary Caucus on Palestine. Now, this is also not easy because there
European. But